Yeah, thanks. Well, so my name is Donna Levan. I have been in the recruiting industry on and off for about 15 years. I currently am the senior talent acquisition specialist for a company called Manus Innovation. And we're basically a consulting firm for facility maintenance, sustainability, and energy efficiency. So we get to dabble in all of the fun stuff. Love the company I work for. We're really we're no longer a startup, so we kind of get to be past the startup infancy stage, and now we're more in the toddler stage where we're running and growing, and so it's a really exciting time with them right now. Yeah, absolutely. So posting and praying isn't a trend anymore. We don't get to do that. No, I think the biggest thing is utilizing LinkedIn. I think it's become such a great resource with the different groups that you can be a part of and some of the influencers that are on there. And then also, attending some conferences here and there. My company just sponsored me to go to the SHRM Talent Acquisition Leadership Conference out there. And that was such a cool conference. It was here in Denver. And so just brainstorming what works, what's not working, touching base with other people in the industry, making those connections, not just with candidates, but with other recruiters, and just finding out what works for them. Those have been like the biggest keys for me. And honestly, I think we're all just winging it. I don't think any of us have like this super secret way. I think we're all just kind of winging it right now. But I think at the end of the day, LinkedIn has been a big resource for me to dive into different trends and some of the top influencers. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest challenges is the reputation we have. I think traditionally in the past, recruiters have been kind of tagged as lazy, and we've got such a bad reputation that going into it, I know, on both sides of it, I've been able to do agency recruiting and corporate recruiting. And so I think as a corporate recruiter, what I find is people just think instantly when you say recruiter, you're one of the headhunting people they're just a number for, right? So I think just overcoming that stigma is huge. And getting people to trust you as a professional, as somebody who is an industry leader, those kinds of things. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge to face. And of course, the market, especially right now. That's such a huge thing. In 15 years, I've never seen a market like that. I know everybody talks about this, but it's so true. So not being able to understand the market or diving into a market where it's so job heavy and candidate lacking, that's a huge one. It's so funny you see that. I'm constantly changing how to be more efficient as a recruiter. I will say sticky notes. It's so old school, but sticky notes has been my life. But also learning new trends on being efficient. I will tell you, this is so cheesy and so dorky, but TikTok has come up with people on TikTok have so many cool things. They're like, oh, have you ever thought of using your iPhone for this? And so, it's really cool to come up with different ways. I would say the biggest thing for me is to-do lists. I'm old school, so I have to have it written down in front of me. And I'm always impressed with people who can do it all on the computer on notes or whatever, but I am old school. I need it in a notebook right next to me. But really keeping track of where I am with everything. Taking notes daily, the to-do list, checking in, those kind of tools have been so helpful for me. Yeah, I feel like recruiting in general is so much like dating, right? Like I've been married for 15 years, so I can only assume it's like dating, but the whole process of sourcing and screening and the face-to-face interview and the talent assessment, all of that kind of stuff. And so ghosting is so real, even with candidates. They just, no matter how friendly you are, no matter how knowledgeable you are, how great the interview or the date had gone, ghosting is inevitable. I just try, my personality is very much like, I've been in this long enough, it's never personal. So just trying to make sure that like my last point of contact with them, I kind of leave it on them. Like, hey, just wanted to make sure you're okay, that nothing happened. And then just keep it friendly. If you have any questions or, if there's anything else I can do to help clarify anything for you, I think just keeping it friendly and keeping that door open. And it can be hard, right? Because especially if they're ghosting like third round interview or whatever, and you're like, oh, but I thought they were interested. Just keeping it casual and not taking it personal, that lightness tends to have them turn around a little bit. I think I've had more success with like a friendly, hey, checking in, are you alive kind of thing, where it's on them, like, I want to make sure you didn't die. That's been great. Yeah. Post and pray sometimes is still good, right? Like, you're still posting jobs, you're still able to find candidates. But when those candidates aren't coming through, I would say LinkedIn has been my best resource, in addition to just asking your network. I had one position that was a really tough position, and I kept putting out there to our company, like, hey, we have this position. And it was a really tough role to fill. And I was having a conversation at lunch, and somebody was like, wait a minute, I know somebody that does that. And it ended up being such a great connection. They're employed by us. They're an awesome add to our family. And so just asking people has been really easy. I say this and I hate to say it, but it always boils down to who you know, not what you know. And so being able to reach out to your network and having close communication with those people has been really helpful. But LinkedIn, and then also there's a lot of different groups that you can join to be a part of that are free. And so just posting it out there, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn groups that you have, or groups within like the SHRM community, things like that, just posting, talking about that there has been a great resource as well. Yeah. Especially for new people. It's so like, I have a template for myself that I use, and I think that those are so helpful. I've been doing this for so many years. It's important to me that it feel more organic than tell me about a time when, great, what did you do in this, like those kind of questions I try to steer away from. But when you're just starting out, it can really feel like you're stumbling through, like you're trying to remember a script and you want to make sure you remember the script. I think really familiarizing yourself with what the questions are, being intentional with those questions. And also remember, they're interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. So being as prepared as you can with the questions that you're asking. And so I always like to start my interview with just getting to know them. Let's all calm down and be, get comfortable together first, because as I said, they're interviewing you too. So that first few minutes of getting to know them, hey, how are you? Building that energy. People tend to read off of you when you're interviewing, so making sure that your vibe is good. And then from getting to know you, kind of letting them introduce themselves to me. A lot of times the interviews will flow naturally. They'll be very organic if you let them. And so when they're starting to talk about themselves, they'll dive into things like, well, at my last job, great, tell me about what you were responsible for at that job. And so as you familiarize yourself with the interview questions, you'll be able to keep the conversation more organic if you know the questions you're asking. Absolutely. I think the biggest quality that a candidate can have is being able to match my energy. And I know that's a big ask with candidates, but when they're able to match my energy and they show interest in the position, that gets me every time. When I know that they've done their research, I know that they're familiar with the job description. I know that this is something they want. Even a little bit level of nervousness is always good, because it shows that they're interested. And then the ability to ask questions, smart questions. I'm always turned off when they ask those very stereotypical questions. Tell me about the, you can't avoid a lot of questions because they're important, like tell me about the culture. But I want to make sure that they're asking smart questions that show me what's important to them about their role too. Absolutely. I was thinking about this question and I'm like, oh gosh, we make all the mistakes all the time. But I think the biggest one is making assumptions. And whether it's making assumptions on their resume, making assumptions about, their names, D&I has become such a big thing. And so overlooking candidates from the very beginning for certain things is huge. Those assumptions get you every time. I actually had a hiring manager a long time ago that had rejected a candidate because they made a specific assumption that with just clarification could have been totally avoided. And they lost a really good candidate because of it. And so I think that's one of the bigger things is if you have a question, ask it. Don't make the assumptions. I think that's a really big mistake. And then also follow up. And follow up at the end of the interview after the interview is so important. I know a lot of times recruiters tend to be like, they didn't send me a thank you email. And it's like, but you do send them a thank you email either. So that end of communication is so important. Not keeping that rolling is going to be important. Communication is so key. Yeah. Not doing references. I had a candidate and not listening to my gut at the same time. Those two things were like the recipe for a disaster. I think a lot of like one trait with a recruiter that's really good is being able to read people and having a strong intuition. And I just ignored it because this candidate had all the checklists, right? Like they had the experience, they had the personality, but there was something about them. And I didn't. And so I went to my manager and I was like, something just doesn't feel right about this, but blah, 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 and I was explaining like this, I can't put my finger on it, but I really like this candidate. And he was like, well, what do you think you should do? And I'm like, well, obviously references. I got so busy with like all the things that we do, right? The 500 things that are up in the air all the time. And I ended up not following up with references for this person. And it bit me in the butt big time. It turned out that the candidate was notorious for stealing information for other companies. And so they had they'd gotten through the whole process and it was kind of smart, to be honest. It was kind of smart, but like they were looking for information for the department that they had interviewed. And I didn't do my references and I should have because somebody that they were listing had mentioned, just so you know, this is not a legit person that's looking to work for you. So that bit me in the butt big time. Yeah, this was something I learned, gosh, in the very beginning. And I know that this is kind of directed towards newer recruiters. And I remember I was pretty new in the agency world. And one of the things that my boss had taught me, the president of the company, he's amazing. He founded a recruiting agency, and I felt like he had all the knowledge. He knew all the things. And so one of the things that he taught me early on is to stand up when you're making that cold call. And that just changes your tone. It changes your tone physically, it changes your energy. You're not just sitting slumped over. And so it gives you a little bit more confidence when you're talking. And so that's a big one for me. Even to this day, I try to stand up, especially if I'm nervous about who I'm calling, to stand up and have that conversation. And, headsets are amazing, to be able to do the actual cold calling and be able to kind of pace around a little bit. But that's the biggest one, is standing up when I'm cold calling, because it just gives me an extra boost of energy and confidence. And then I would say the other thing is just feeling that excitement with those cold calls, knowing what I'm calling for. That's a huge one too, because you don't want to call into somewhere and be like, oh, and have that nervousness. Like, you are an awesome person. You're a little, I don't know if I can say badass, but you're a badass. Like, be the badass that you are and just say, hi, I'm so-and-so. And I think people love having that energy, so they're more inclined to talk to you. Yes. Oh my goodness. Obviously, and it's so funny because I just mentioned assumptions, right? But a big red flag is resumes. That's a big red flag. If they have job happiness, if their resume just seems way too catered to my specific job description, do they really know? And then also conversations, having that, knowing that they're totally full of it, like they're just winging it. Those are some big red flags, as well as, on the interview, them not being prepared. If they haven't researched my company and they can't tell me something about who my company is, I'm like, no, we're not interested. They just don't take the time. And those are some really big flags. Or showing up late, not communicating before the interview, just kind of leaving me hanging. I always send a follow-up interview to the calendar invite that I send out. So, hey, just saw you accepted my invite. I'm super excited. And then they don't respond back. That's always a red flag. Lack of communication. So those are some pretty big red flags. I feel like there's probably so many more red flags than this that you should see it coming a mile away. But honestly, the biggest things are not things you don't even see, right? Like you don't even see it coming half the time when you're like, you didn't accept, what just happened? I did not see that coming. So sometimes those red flags are hard to see, but I'm gonna say it's mostly communication. That's a huge one if they don't have great communication and bad resumes. Yes, I do. The big one I'm gonna say is pick up the phone. That's a huge one. Pick up the phone. Candidates are not gonna be crawling to you right now. So you've gotta pick up the phone to get that candidate flow. That's just so big. And then the other thing is outlining expectations from your hiring manager from the beginning. A lot of times recruiters get really nervous with the hiring managers because in an agency setting, they're the client. And then in corporate setting, they're still kind of the client. They're still the person we are going to. At the end of the day, we still have the same goal. We're working towards the same goal. So they don't necessarily get to call the shots. Make sure that you have expectations set out from the beginning. An intake call is probably the most important aspect when starting a position rec, is having that intake call and being able to understand what is the timeline, what is the importance, what are the key requirements for the position. I always like to ask, what are some deal breakers for you with this position? Those are really good questions because then they could say, oh gosh, if they used to work in this industry, they're probably not going to be a good fit for this industry. And so that really helps me get some good tips on where I'm going to recruit for. That's kind of leading into the other thing, is being able to ask a lot of questions to your hiring manager, like what companies are a good place, do you think would be a good place to recruit from it within? And they're like, oh, you know what? I love people who work at, Chipotle or whatever the case may be. That's always a good resource. Just asking why a lot is going to be a huge resource for you to be able to get that going faster. Again, I've said it a million times, but communication is going to be so important. But setting up those expectations in the very beginning is going to help that process go along. And it's twofold: giving the hiring manager what the expectations are, giving the candidate what the expectations are, and just being clear and concise with those will really help the process go a lot faster. Yes. So again, it's just going to boil down to asking the questions, staying on top of things. It's so easy to let people get lost in the transition of everything. And I think one of the things that have helped me really successful in what I do is treating the candidates like they're a person and not a number. And I think that just goes such a long ways that it helps the process all together. When they feel like you're a trusted person, when they feel like you know what you're doing, it just goes a long ways.